You're all in for a treat. Next up is Dr. Erica McAlister. She is the Principal Curator of Flies and Fleas at the Natural History Museum in London. And she's also an award-winning author and radio presenter, and she's hilarious. So welcome, Erica.
I'm also quite small. No pressure then. So hello everyone, I'm here to talk about some of the best animals on the planet. And I realize that when I talk about flies, my opinion about them being the best animals on the planet isn't often shared by anyone. I know there's at least one person in the room who loves flies as much as I do, so that's really good. And hopefully by the end, I will persuade some of you why flies are so important and why we should stop ignoring them. We don't know often. It's not that we just ignore them, we actually purposefully go out and try and exterminate so much of them. And this is very wrong. Even those things that you absolutely hate buzzing around your house at night are absolutely critical. So first off, I'm going to do the thing. There we go. First off, what is a fly? So the problem with common names is that we think of many things being a fly, but actually a true fly is very different. So for example, a dragonfly, it's not a fly. I mean, it's not a dragon either. But there are many things that we need to talk about them. So this is a fly, the definition of what makes a fly. And when we do order level identification, the scientific name is Diptera, Diptera. The roots come from Greek, with pteron meaning wing. So these are one pair of wings. This is what separates them from the other lesser insects, such as the ants. We have... There may be a few digs, there may be. Flies have suctorial mouth parts, so when they talk about you being bitten by a mosquito, you cannot be. If people talk about being bitten by a horsefly, no. You've been sliced and maimed and stabbed and all those wonderful things, but you have never been bitten. And also, they have the one pair of halteres. These are the most amazing balancing organs, okay? These are its gyroscopic organs that enable it to balance and enable them to be some of the supreme flyers on the planet. And this is a point I will get to later. But all of these things are about the adult stage. I brought here, this is a giant fly. This is a Chinese fly. Now, what is amusing, what most people do, and which is our biggest problem, is taxonomic failures. So most people go, oh my God, it's a really big mosquito. And I like the fact you used The Guardian earlier as a reference, a brilliant British journal. So I've picked a brilliant American representation of this to highlight what I have a problem with. So they talk about it being this terrifying giant mosquito. It's not, it's a crane fly, okay? It doesn't really even have functional mouth parts as an adult. The most it can do is dangle its legs at you. And as far as I know, no death has occurred by dangly legs. But it's very funny, but this is very important, because when we come to describing our environment and studying our environment, we really need to see what is there. So let's talk numbers. So flies are the part of the insects, and the insects dominate this planet. It's already been mentioned about the beetles and how many beetles have been described. They did have a few people who loved them more than anything. Charles Daz, as I affectionately call him, or Charles Darwin. He was a very early advocate of beetles and loved them without describing them. And the flies got ignored, okay? So at the moment, we think there's about 165,000 species of fly in the world. Do you know how many are in America? Any guesses? 1,000. Wow. That would be amazing. Pretty much no. So we have current estimates. We were chatting with our fly friends last night, as you do, and they guesstimated around 19 to 20,000. You do not know how many flies are in this country. You do not know how many flies are in California. Now, we have a long history in the UK of nerds, amateur nerds, running around the countryside describing it. And in the UK, we have over 7,100, and I think the last count was 92. I don't know. which is more species of fly in the UK than there are mammals on the planet. So, just to put it in perspective, so if our tiny little country has that many, can you imagine how many there will be in the US? So there's a lot we need to start thinking about. And they get everywhere. And this is why one of the greatest things on the planet is to be a dipterist, because you can go, where do I want to go? I want to go here. And they're like, yep. And not even on the planet. The first animals in space were flies. So they went up in 1947 and have gone up ever since. But here we go. We've got some flies on the side here. These are wingless flies. Just to throw a spanner in the works, flies took the blueprint of what it meant to be a fly and threw it away. So some of them don't even have wings. So these are the largest purely terrestrial animal found in Antarctica at like 5 millimeters. You then got the ones, this is a housefly, the one with the green background, and these dominate the Arctic. So there's over 4,000 described species of insect in the Arctic regions, of which 2,000 of them are flies. And they are the top pollinators in the Arctic. So that little housefly flying around the living room that you're trying to get rid of is actually trying to save the planet. Just saying. Then we might as well go quite local, because in California, you have some of the most extraordinary flies on the planet. Honestly, this is on a hit list of holidays, destinations for me to go to. This is the I know, I have very odd holidays. This is the Mono Lakes of California, and you have scuba diving flies. This is the most saline environment, on the planet, and yet these little ladies, obviously it's mostly ladies, because it always is, but these little ladies are able to enter the water, they penetrate it, they go down, and they lay the larvae at the bottom of these lakes. And the larvae are able to exist in these environments, feeding off these dead bodies that just float down. It's a great environment. What I really like, is you can't really see it from this image, is that this plastron, this water bubble that encases her, if you look closely, if you have an opportunity, the eyes aren't covered up. So it's like the inverse of us when we go scuba diving. And it's amazing how this has evolved. You then get the ones who don't go down, they go up. So these are some midges, some gall midges that are found up in the mountains. So these are amazing. I've collected at 5,000 meters in Peru. I wasn't very effective. I don't know if you've been at what is 5,000 meters? Something feet. Okay, it's high. It's very high. And the thing is, there's a lot going on, and like the flies were laughing at me because they're not moving, and I'm like, come on, flies. But they've gone down into caves. So this is the largest true flying troglobont. I only lives in a cave. Everyone goes, oh, it's bats. No, bats go in and out. These flies stay in there, and they are blind. So they feel themselves around the cave. They fly around, and they've got really hairy wings. We've only ever found females, so we're not quite sure whether the males are very small and insignificant, or I didn't say anything, it's nature telling me this, or whether they're just not there at all. And then another amazing species that I had the most amazing privilege of, was it only yesterday or the day before yesterday, of collecting are the petroleum flies. So we went to the La Brea tar pits, and we collected flies whose larvae live on the surface of these tar pits, as well as the adults who run around. This is an incredible habitat, the idea of living in there. So there's such a diversity. They get everywhere, they do everything. And also, they are the most ecologically important creatures. There's a little bit of bias in my talk. I'm totally prepared to admit that. But when we talk about pollinators, everybody automatically goes to the bees, okay? And it's like, no, honeybees, as we've already found out, already know they're basically a domesticated farmyard animal. They really do not help when it comes to our biodiversity. And flies get up in the morning and go to bed late at night when the bees have already gone to sleep, okay? They are out there doing all sorts of things, and as we know, a lot of them are attracted to some of them the less pleasant environments, but this is actually very important. Some of them are herbivores. We know about sanguivores. You know about all the mosquitoes and the blood feeding. They're fungivores. They're decomposers. They're predators. They're parasites, parasitoids. You name it, they do it. So when it comes to ecosystem functionality, flies have got their little tarsa in about everything. And one of the great things about flies, and I have to say, well done, ants, for doing this as well, is that you have this alternation of generations. So you have the adult, and we always think about the adults being the most important. And it's generally not, because that isn't the feeding stage of flies. Okay, with most of them, they feed, it's your toddler. Okay, it's designed to stuff as much food inside itself to enable it to lay down enough resources for the adult stage, which is concentrated, as we can see here, just on reproduction and migration. So they have these different things, and this is great because this separation enables them to live in completely different habitats. So baby bees do what? Nothing. Right? They stay at home, they are looked after, they are fed, they're out there. Baby flies are out there working from day dot. They are decomposing, they're doing all sorts. So for example, this is a migratory fly. This is a Eupioides. You get them in America. You have a different species to us. But these will travel thousands of kilometers. So everyone thinks about the monarchs being the most amazing migrators, whereas these 4 billion turn up each spring in the UK. Okay, along the way, they've had 3 generations, and they die. They add nitrogen. We already know the impact of nitrogen. They get into the UK. They are prolific with the local flies. And they become very more fecund when they interbreed with the local flies, and they produce what looks like moving bird feces. Now, these bird feces is really important because they're aphidophagous. So these are little biological warfare units. They munch between 600 and 1,000 aphids before they metamorphosize into the adult. Really good. So we have important pollinators at the adult stage and these predators or decomposers at the larval stage. This was arguably the worst sampling habitat I've ever done. This is a Titan Arab. This is, so we have the myophyllae, the classic pollination, and the sapromyophyllae. Let's hang around things that smell like feces. This really did. I have sampled off dead bodies. Nothing was like this. And a lot of plants are sneaky, and they use this for their own advantage. Don't trust plants. They all look pretty. Never trust pretty things. You have no idea what they're getting up to. And this poor little defenseless fly comes along and is kidnapped by this plant. It spends 24 hours in it, smothering itself with the pollen before the plant releases it to let it go. So we're seeing all sorts of examples of this happening. You don't think flies are good pollinators? You don't want chocolate. I hate chocolate. You love it. But they are some of the most important pollinators of chocolate. These tiny little flies get into this plant, which is basically the panda of the plant world. It's really bad at reproducing, but they do take these tiny little flies in to do that. We don't know enough about which species are pollinating cocoa. This is arguably one of the most economically important crops on the planet, and still we haven't spent enough time looking at the ecology of the pollinators. And some of them have extraordinary mouth parts. So if this was the equivalent of you, your tongue would be 6 meters long. So they have co-evolved to have some very special guild relationships with a lot of plants. If you ever get an opportunity, go to South Africa, go hang around all the mountains, the table, you have the most amazing diversity of plants, and it's because you have all these co-adapted species. And one of the things I like in the UK is this massive amateur community that we have talked about, and they're going out there, and this is what you can all do, they're going out and looking at our species. So we're still learning what's about the mouth parts of our creatures. So this is a bee fly. Love a bee fly. Worst example of maternal care, as she hurls her eggs around the garden. But she's very good. We've just now looked at how much they can extend their mouth parts. So they're able to really penetrate deep into tubular flowers. So this is really important. You can tell when you hang around entomologists, because when we go, it's that big. And everyone's like, wow, that's enormous. And so we do have some big flies. So this one here, you can see it's like 9 centimeters long. So many inches. And it's great. And this one, everyone's like, oh my gosh, look at it. And it looks so terrible. So the males are pollinators. The males, they take a bit of nectar. Females, adults, don't feed. Okay? And the larvae, we know, hang around ant burrows. There may be a little bit of ant predation going on. Whoop, whoop. We've then got big babies. So these is pentathalmids. These are timber flies. These ones are neotropical. And they've got huge grubs. And their grubs take up to 5 years to develop. So when we think about habitat requirements, we generally don't think about the larval habitat, and it's really, really important for a lot of these long-lived animals. Some of them give birth to live young. I know. So she will actually get pregnant. She has lactating glands on the inside. Now, the classic example of Tetsi, these are amazing. I was born on Christmas Day, and my mother always says, oh, you're such a pain. And I'm like, Mom, it could be worse. Because they give birth to a larvae, an offspring that weighs more than them. Oh, good crowd response. And the thing is, so there's loads of these. These are bat flies, these are bird flies, these are absolutely amazing. Just understanding how these evolved and what they do and the specialization, we have so much to know. We have very little flies. These are what you call punkies, as I've just learnt, or no-see-ums, or biting midges. In the UK, there's a lot of very inappropriate words for these, especially in Scotland, but what I do like is they've spawned a fashion line. So that's quite nice. But they are, again, a lot of them are pollinators. Okay, we're only just beginning. So when people talk about let's eradicate species, I'm like, hold on, we do not know enough about the environment. This is a maggot that maybe its mother could only love. But these are really important decomposers. And when we think about everyone says, oh, flies are disgusting. They hang around all this really dank, disgusting environment. We need them to. Can you imagine if we didn't get rid of the bodies? Can you imagine? I'm not saying, like, I'm killing bodies. I'm saying, like, natural, like, decay, natural decomposition. We need these because they're some of the first to turn up. And in fact, we can use these as medics, and we can use these as detectives. So this is a forensically important species, and the females, the mothers, are able to sniff a corpse from up to 7 kilometers away. We use these in the NHS in the UK for debridement therapy. So these are able to eat the necrotic flesh around your wound, and they release enzymes that binds your flesh better. Absolutely fantastic creatures. And the thing is, because they live in these disgusting environments, they're exceptionally clean. So it's very good. Most people don't like mosquitoes. Everyone's like, oh, they're terrible. But just think about how many larvae there are. Okay, they're really important as bird food and things like that. They're really important with this food webs. But there's also some fun things associated with them. So this is a massive mosquito. Again, entomologists. This is a massive larvae, right? And these ones feast on other mosquito larvae. Okay, so we can use them as biological control. Unless you're like me and you forget, and one of them gets into your sample and eats all the really important specimens. You're like, no. But these are great. These are huge, but the adults don't even blood feed. Okay, so they're really important pollinators. So we need to learn more about the species in our environment. This is another wingless fly. It's a bit of a cutie. Looks a little bit like a teddy bear. I have a soft spot for these. But these only live on honeybees. The only reason I'll keep honeybees around is because of these things. But our lack of understanding, the UK, the British Beekeeping Society, had these listed as parasites, and therefore they must get rid of them all. They're not, they're kleptoparasites. They're really actually important. And how many people have got beards in the room? There we go. So imagine this beautiful little creature, every time you feed and you've got food all around your mouth, these beautiful little things will come down and they will eat the food and they will go away. So they're really quite important little creatures, but we wiped them out. So again, we need to know more about them to actually get them back. And then we really will talk about the flies that are quite economically important to us, which go around doing all sorts of things. Foridae, okay? These, I affectionately call these horrid forids. There's somebody online probably going to kill me and somebody in the room. And I call them horrid forids just because they're very taxonomically difficult to understand. And this is a problem with flies, is that they are difficult to actually learn to speciate, and we're trying to develop new things. But just this one family of flies does every ecological interaction. It is the most ecologically important family, I'd say, because of it. So you name it, they're doing it. Some of them live in shoe polish, some of them feast in coffins, you name it, they live in termite nests, they do all sorts of things. And there's a whole group of them that decapitate ants. It was like I knew there was going to be an ant person in the audience. I don't know. So what's amazing about these is that these, and you can see the ants getting really stressed. They're very aware of what's happening. So these tiny little flies will come up and start like irritating these little ants to try and get in. And you can see already her ovipositor, her egg-laying tube. So what she wants to do is she wants to get through the weakened parts of the back to lay her little eggs in, okay? The larvae hatch, crawl up through the body into the head capsules. It's like a horror movie gone wrong, this. It's great. And then they will actually spend a couple of weeks feasting in the head capsule of an ant. And the ant is carrying on doing nothing, right? It's like, doo-doo. Something is obviously going wrong, but whatever. And my favorite ones, obviously everyone has a favorite decapitator. My favorite ones are the ones who release an enzyme which causes their head to fall off, and it's like a perfect little capsule for these little ants, these little flies to live in. You know, they have a nice little secure environment. Now, everyone thinks this is quite, oh my God, this is terrible. But imagine these ants are fire ants, okay? And we know how much problems we have with fire ants in this country. So they have gone back to South America and they found some species that are very, very species specific, some flies that only attack the fire ants. And they've started, under very controlled environments, releasing them. Now, when the fire ants die back, so do these flies. So they're very important that we start looking at these to help us sort out some of the mess we've made of the planet. And within this family as well, as we're doing big and tiny and small, we've got some of the smallest creatures within the fly world. And this was described by a Californian, you'd be glad to know, and it only measures 0.4 millimeters. These tiny little flies, again, live in the nests of ants. And these are tiny little ants, and they have these smallest flies. We have names. That's the thing with a lot of flies. We have a lot of names to them, but that's about it. So I can go through the collection at work, and I can show you all these amazing flies. I can tell you something about them, but till we all start getting out there and looking at them, it's hard for us to understand what's going on. We talk about the ecology, we talk about conservation, but really, we need all of you to start paying attention. And you don't have to go out into this. You have rather nice habitat around here. But you can just start looking in your own yard and doing all sorts of things. So these are very little creatures. There's about 165,000 described so far, but we think there's millions to go, okay? I don't want to think of millions because that gives me a heart attack and I have to go and sit in a cold room knowing how much work we have to do. But we are massively undescribed. So you need to do this. You need to look like me, running around, put a net, go and explore what's going on, or just sit down and observe. You don't have to take photos of piles of feces if you don't want to, but maybe grab a glass of wine, sit in the garden, have a phone, because everyone has a phone, and take photos. There's so many recording schemes, iNaturalist and programs like this, that you can actually put in this data. And this is great, so all of you can be helping saving the planet by just sitting at home, which is a fabulous way to end. Thank you. There's a less than subtle hint for further ways to find out about flies on the slide behind me. Yeah?
Do the petroleum flies have a way not to get stuck in the tar?
This is, do the petroleum flies have a way not to get stuck in the tar? That's a research question coming up. Yes. I know. So then you've done some work looking at them, haven't you? Under a little bit. Yeah, so we're gonna use some nice photography, some SEM, and try and have a look at their little feet to understand what's going on. But also the chemical structure. I mean, obviously they do, but we just don't know how yet.
So many flies are associated with carrying certain human diseases, and I know that there's work being done like at UN level trying to look at genetic engineering in order to sort of eliminate reproduction in those species. What's your thoughts on that? Are there some particular concerns that you've had?
So this is about the eradication of certain species. There's all sorts of developments, like there's what we call sterile insect technique. So you actually sterilize a lot of the males, you release them into the population. And so when they copulate with the females, you get no viable offspring. There's other methods where they're doing gene alteration. So they're trying to wipe out some of the most prevalent, most important vectors. Now, there is some mechanical transfer with disease, but the big things that we talk about with the vectors of mosquitoes is the things they carry. So, for example, the malaria plasmodium. So what they're trying to do is to actually do this to get rid of these species. Now, I'm not an advocate of that at all. Now, I'm not saying, look, I don't think it's bad and we need to look after the humans. But what I am saying is that every time we've tried to eradicate species in that way, something else comes in to fill the gap. So until we know more about the ecology, until we know all of that, I think we're going at it like a hammer, and actually we should be looking at it in a more subtle way. So maybe breaking the disease transmission barrier of some way is much better than going in like that. So for example, in Africa, we've got the top vectors, so Anopheles gambii and Funestus and all of those, but we're seeing new ones coming. And new ones, as we encroach into the Congo and different habitats like that, species that weren't vectors are now like, oh, do you know what? The malaria is moving into them. So just wiping out these things, I don't think is the answer. Plus, mosquitoes are pollinators, and their larvae are really important in food systems. So if we were to get rid of them, suddenly we've done a massive hole for a lot of other species. That was my serious bit.